Hi everyone, it's Katrina. The bear dog. An ancient jawbone belonging to a monstrous creature from prehistoric days was recently discovered in France. This creature has been described as a bear dog, and scientists have named it after a child-murdering cyclops. The bear dog lived all throughout the world 7.5 million years ago. It lived in North America, Europe, Asia, even Africa. It was a powerful predator, a carnivore with jaws that could tear and rip flesh, peeling meat right off the bone. The newest discovered specimen was found in the Pyrenees mountain range of Europe, and it belongs to an entirely new species. Bear dogs all belong to the family Amphicyonidae, of which all are extinct. And although they are called bear dogs, they don't belong to the bear or dog family. But they did possess features which are similar to both. For example, they had heavy bear-like bodies. They walked flat-footed like bears, but they had muscly legs and long snouts like dogs. This newest species has been named Tartarocyon, which comes from the one-eyed giants Tartaro, who ate children in Basque mythology. The giant supposedly lived in France in the 8th century BC, which is fitting since that's where the fossil was found. The most spectacular part of the fossil is definitely its teeth. According to paleontologists at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Science, its teeth were so strong and sharp that it could have crushed bones into dust as it consumed entire animals. The creature weighed upwards of 700 pounds and lived from between 23 million and 5.3 million years ago. Matsoidae. Matsoidae isn't a single snake, but a family of extinct Gondwanan snakes spanning the fossil record from the Upper Cretaceous to the Late Pleistocene eras. The snakes in this family are the most primitive that ever lived, including extinct boas, pythons, and the legendary Gigantophis. Maybe you've heard about the Titanoboa, allegedly the biggest snake that ever lived, at a whopping 42 to 50 feet long. We don't know exactly how big this thing grew, but modest estimates have placed it at about 33 feet. That would make it slightly smaller than the Titanoboa, unless of course scientists are wrong. It did live millions of years before the Titanoboa, and it's difficult to properly gauge size based on a small sampling of bones. For example, only around 30 Titanoboa skeletons have been found, and scientists still can't figure out how many vertebrae they even had, although they do estimate about 250. That's the issue with these things. Scientists can only really make educated guesses. At the end of the day, if the Gigantophis wasn't bigger than the Titanoboa, it was definitely a close call. The Titanoboa lived between 60 and 58 million years ago, while the Gigantophis lived as recently as 40 million years ago. Megalania prisca. According to the Australian Museum, the Megalania prisca is the largest terrestrial lizard that ever lived. It was a gigantic monitor lizard that would make the Komodo dragon look like a tiny baby. It was first described back in 1859 by Sir Richard Owen, who determined it lived throughout the forests and grasslands of Australia. It would have been an exceptionally fierce predator, and just like its distant cousin, the Komodo dragon from Indonesia, just about everything within range was up for eating. The gigantic lizard would have feasted on mammals, giant snakes, and even other reptiles if it felt like it. It could grow to be over 15 feet long, making it roughly the size of a freakishly large alligator. What makes it even more terrifying was the possibility that it may have been able to climb trees. Actually, some scientists believe the Megalania might have been an ambush predator. That means that if it were alive today, moving through the Australian wilderness would be like playing Russian roulette. The gigantic lizard could have hid itself in the underbrush, then lashed out with toxic saliva and razor-sharp teeth. With just one bite, its venom would have been fatal. We don't actually know if it was venomous or not, but scientists think it was. Floppy-eared dog monster. A totally new creature was recently discovered in the Burgess Shale in Canada, and it doesn't look like anything scientists have found before. It's been described as a floppy-eared hound, and yet it was a marine creature that looked like a bizarre mutant shrimp with half the body of a centipede. There's really no easy way to describe it, as it would have looked like something that came from a faraway galaxy, like an alien creature that swam through space. It's called Balhuticaris voltae, and it's a gigantic bivalved arthropod. That means it's very distantly related to the crustaceans of today. It's kind of like the great-great-grandparent of crabs and shrimps. Its carapace is particularly unique in that it actually grows over its head and drapes down past its body like a pair of huge floppy ears, similar to a basset hound. The creature lived 500 million years ago during the Cambrian explosion. The explosion started about 541 million years ago and lasted until 485 million years ago. It was one of the most diverse times in Earth's history. This was a time when the ocean was blooming with unfathomable life forms, strange and indescribable monsters of every shape and form. These creatures are well represented in the Burgess Shale, which is a huge deposit of fossils from that same period. Scientists believe there was a great mudslide which trapped thousands upon thousands of creatures in muck to be preserved. This is a fascinating hypothesis, because it would mean that most of the fossils we found from the Cambrian explosion came from just one spot. It would mean we have barely 1% documented of all the crazy animals that existed at the dawn of complex life. Sarcus. In the spring of 1923, a group of museum researchers traveled to Inner Mongolia to hunt for jewels. But instead of finding treasure in the form of minerals, they discovered a rich treasure trove of fossils. One of the young paleontologists in the group, Can Chuen Pao, came across the gigantic skull of a monstrous beast. It was unlike anything they'd seen before, at least 3 feet long and complete with large teeth. One of the researchers immediately decided the animal was a carnivore, but others in the camp disagreed. This led to an argument, as some believed the skull belonged to an extinct giant pig. They took the skull back to the museum and named it Sarcus mongoliensis, in honor of the expedition leader, Roy Chapman Andrews. To this day, the skull found in 1923 is the only specimen of the species. Everything we know about this dinosaur comes from this one sample. And yet scientists have been able to figure out that the dinosaur lived 45 million years ago, that it was about 6 feet high at the shoulders and 12 feet long in total. If true, that would make the Sarcus the largest meat-eating mammal known to science. It would have looked like a mix between a pig and a hippo, and was perhaps even distantly related to whales. Big shout out to Godesi and Joseph Neff. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because why not? The wondrous crowned crocodile. 255 million years ago in Russia, there was a very strange omnivorous monstrosity called Estamenosukis mirabilis. This translates to wondrous crowned crocodile. It was named this because of a pair of bony knobs projecting from each side of its cranium. It gave the animal the appearance of wearing a crown of bones. It was like antlers, but not nearly as long or pointy. Now don't let the name confuse you, because this thing wasn't a crocodile. In fact, it wasn't anything close to a crocodile. If anything, the creature was more like a prehistoric hippopotamus. It walked on 4 legs slightly above the ground, could live on land, but also enjoyed being in the water, and it could kill and eat live animals or just munch on plants to survive. It could grow to be roughly 10 feet long, but the largest part of the animal was its head, 1/5 of its entire body at over 2 feet in length. The Bulldog abelisaurid. A team of researchers from both Egypt and America recently discovered an entirely new kind of dinosaur in the Sahara Desert of Egypt. The dinosaur belongs to the family of abelisaurid, a group of ancient theropods. Theropods are defined by hollow bones and 3-toed limbs, kind of like chickens, and were the apex predators of the Cretaceous era around 98 million years ago. This particular dinosaur was about 20 feet long, ate nothing but meat, and had a strange, ugly face. Its face was kind of smashed in, similar to a bulldog, but it walked around on its hind legs, and it had small teeth along with short, flailing arms. This was a remarkable discovery for 2 main reasons. First of all, the fact that the scientists found a new species is always very exciting. Second, because no other abelisaurid dinosaur has ever been found in northern Africa. These dinosaurs have only been found in Europe and in the southern hemisphere. It was dug up back in 2016 during an expedition, but it took 6 years of investigating the bones to verify it as a new species. It's now one of the ugliest, or rather weirdest looking carnivores from the Cretaceous era. The dinosaur lived in a part of the world that would have been entirely terrifying. According to Hisham Salam from the American University in Cairo, it lived in a densely populated area of carnivores. The Sahara Desert was home to one of the highest concentrations of predators in the prehistoric world, and scientists are still trying to work out how they all lived together in such a small place without killing each other. Armored herbivores. Canadian paleontologists recently analyzed the fossilized stomach contents from a remarkably preserved nodosaur. The nodosaur was a peculiar type of ankylosaur, one that lived 110 million years ago during the Cretaceous. It lived in what is now Alberta and the Canadian prairies. It was essentially an armored tank and was covered in bony osteoderms. These are quite similar to the structures which make up turtle shells. You might say that ankylosaurs were just humongous turtles with clubs for tails. In a way, you'd be right. They first appeared in the Middle Jurassic and lived until around the time of the asteroid impact that killed off the dinosaurs. This particular specimen was found totally by accident in March of 2011 by an excavator at the Suncor Millennium Mine. The accidental discovery turned out to be the find of a lifetime. The dinosaur was preserved beyond anyone's wildest imagination. It still had much of its soft tissue, including its scales and the keratin-like material covering its bony armor. Plus, it still had stuff in its stomach. Researchers from the local university were able to look at what the nodosaur had for its last meal. What they found is that the dinosaur really liked eating leaves. 88% of its diet was leaf material, with the rest being mostly stems and wood and charcoal. 85% of the leaves it ate were ferns. This great big tank of a monster had just eaten a belly full of ferns before something killed it. Then, somehow, its body got trapped in the muck in such a way that it hardly decomposed. The giant short-faced kangaroo. The Procoptodon goliah is an extinct type of kangaroo from the Pleistocene period, and while it may have had a body similar to the kangaroos we know today, it was quite different. The main difference was that it had a short face. Its face was kind of flat like a pug, and it didn't have a long snout like normal kangaroos today. This was an absolute beast of a creature. It was the most heavily built kangaroo that scientists have ever found, short and stocky with a single large toe on each foot and clawed fingers for scraping branches. It was almost like a Neanderthal mixed with a kangaroo. It's not clear why the Procoptodon goliah died out while modern kangaroos survived. It lived in the same habitats, in the wind-swept sand dunes and treeless wastelands of New South Wales, but it just didn't make the cut. It went extinct along with every other subspecies of short-faced kangaroo. Brigmophyseter. The Brigmophyseter was a kind of prehistoric whale with teeth. You may have heard that whales used to have 4 legs, and that's true. Whales did at one point walk on land, and it took quite some time for them to actually shed their legs once they moved into the water. But what a lot of people don't realize is that they also had jaws full of teeth that they could use to rip apart fish and squid and even other whales. Although little is known about the behavior of Brigmophyseter, scientists have made some educated guesses. The creature may have used echolocation to track down prey, but there's no actual evidence. Some scientists have also suggested it swam in pods like modern whales, but that's also nothing but speculation. One thing scientists also speculate is that the Brigmophyseter was one of the main things on the menu for the prehistoric Megalodon. Both were swimming in the ocean at the same time during the Miocene and in the same waters. Considering the Megalodon was the biggest and most ferocious shark that ever lived, it wouldn't be hard for it to hunt prehistoric whales, even if those whales did have teeth. In fact, most scientists agree the Megalodon was a whale hunting expert. Australopithecus. Before there were humans, there was Australopithecus. The Australopithecus is actually supposed to be the ancestor of the Homo lineage, which includes all the extinct human species of the past several million years. Australopithecus had human-like features which made it close to the Homo species, and yet it's never actually been proven that Homo sapiens ever evolved from Australopithecus, making this a huge mystery. Australopithecus is currently the oldest human-shaped creature that we know about. The oldest fossil ever is a canine tooth which belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis. which was 3.5 million years old. That was about 1.4 million years before the first Homo species, the Homo habilis, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But what separates the Australopithecus from the Homo species? That's actually a point of contention for scientists. Typically, Homo species are defined by their use of stone tools at the beginning of the Lower Paleolithic era. However, in 2010, evidence was discovered of an Australopithecus afarensis using stone tools 3.3 million years ago. But the biggest difference is all about brain size. The original Australopithecus gari had roughly 28 cubic inches of endocranial volume. That's a fancy way of saying brain size. The Homo habilis had 46 cubic inches of endocranial volume. The brain almost doubled. And by the time the Neanderthals came around, the endocranial volume or brain size had increased to 107 cubic inches. That's almost 4 times bigger. Still, what caused the brain to grow so dramatically continues to be a mystery to this very day. In fact, some fringe theories believe the Australopithecus discovered magic mushrooms in the wilds of Africa and started eating them. The hallucinogenic fungus helped start a process that massively increased intelligence and brain size. However, it's just a theory and hasn't been proven. Homo habilis. Homo habilis, or handyman for short, came into existence roughly 2.31 million years ago. It was one of the longest surviving human ancestors, as it continued to wander across the lands of East and South Africa up until 1.65 million years ago. The species was first described in 1964, and by the 1980s was recognized as the original human ancestor. This was the first species of the Homo genus that came after the Australopithecus, the first hominin with a large brain that was capable of using stone tools. What's quite fascinating is that based on multiple specimens that have been discovered in Africa, the Homo habilis had a very similar body to the most recent Australopithecus. It may have had a bigger brain, but it had the same general skeleton. It was small in stature and males were bigger than females. Males were about 3 feet 11 inches and the females were around 3 feet 3 inches. Another major difference between the first species of Homo and the last species of Australopithecus was meat eating. Scientists believe that Homo habilis consumed larger quantities of meat than its previous ancestors. The Homo habilis lived in extremely primitive societies that scientists believe were similar to chimpanzee or baboon societies. There would have been between 70 and 85 members of the troop, and this would have helped defend against predators like big cats and crocodiles. Homo erectus. Beyond the Homo habilis is the Homo erectus, the second oldest of our species. Homo erectus is also called the upright man, and for good reason. This was the very first human ancestor with proportions similar to what we have today. Rather than hobbling around like chimpanzees, the Homo erectus walked very similar to the way we walk today, upright. Their legs were long, they had shorter arms than they used to, and they were more adapted to living life on the ground. Scientists believe it was the separation from living in trees and jungles that caused the evolution of the Homo erectus, and thus massively changed the physiology of humans. Whereas the Homo habilis was extremely short, the Homo erectus could grow to massive sizes of up to 6 feet 1 inch. In other words, they could grow to be pretty much the same height as we are today. They lived up until around 110,000 years ago. However, it is important to note that even though the Homo erectus was alive up until 110,000 years ago, they weren't the only ones. The Homo erectus coexisted with other branches of humans, even at the time of their creation 1.9 million years ago. For just shy of 2 million years, Homo erectus and other species spread across the globe and may have even fought for dominance. That said, by the end of their time range, when they went extinct, there were likely only 3 main competitors left: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Homoflorensis. The Denisovans. The Denisovans are very close relatives to modern humans and were only recently added to our family tree. Their remains were discovered in a Siberian cave back in 2010. And while not everything is known about them, scientists are confident about a few things. First, they appear to have been a very distinct breed of ancient people who lived in Siberia during the Ice Age. And second, they were probably related to both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. In fact, Some researchers suggest, based on DNA samples, that the Denisovans were a hybrid of modern people and Neanderthals. Here's where the Denisovans most likely came from. Sometime around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, a group of Homo Heidelbergensis left Africa. These extremely primitive people wandered into Eurasia, and then the group split in half. One part of the group migrated into Europe and evolved to become Neanderthals. The other group migrated into Asia and became the Denisovans. And that really sums up human evolution in a nutshell. One person goes left, the other person goes right, and tens of thousands of years later, they are a totally different species. Even more interesting is that the group that didn't even leave Africa and stayed put were the ones who evolved into Homo sapiens. What do you think so far about the evolution process? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Homo Heidelbergensis. Homo Heidelbergensis appeared about 700,000 years ago and went extinct 200,000 years ago. The very first specimen of this creature was discovered in Germany in 1908. A workman near the city of Heidelberg came across a mandible in a sand pit, and this helped to build a clear picture of one of the most important human ancestors. Homo heidelbergensis was slightly smaller than the Homo erectus, standing no taller than 5 feet 9 inches. However, they may have been more intelligent. Evidence has been found at the site of Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel of these primitive people controlling fire. They may have built fireplaces before any other species, keeping themselves warm inside caves and socializing over heated food and bright lights. This may have been the very first Homo species which took advantage of natural shelters. Proof of them has been found all the way from the caves of Israel to the caves of France. And here's another huge thing about Homo heidelbergensis. They were the very first, according to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, to hunt large animals. This would have included elephants, hippopotamuses, and even rhinoceroses. Ancient wooden spears were found in Germany from 400,000 years ago, along with the remains of 10 butchered horses. And so, the Heidelbergensis was most likely spawned from the erectus, and it also was the beginning of the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. Heidelbergensis remained living alongside them all until 200,000 years ago. Homo naledi. Homo naledi was very recently added to the list of extinct human species. Evidence of the animal was discovered while researchers were digging through the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. They discovered lots of hominin remains, and the cave actually turned out to be the richest fossil site of its kind in Africa, according to National Geographic. The excavations revealed a mysterious species with a bizarre jumble of traits. It had a tiny brain, shoulders, and a torso just like an ape, and yet it had human features as well. More recent studies from 2015 say Homo naledi lived as far back as 335,000 years ago. And while that at first may not mean anything, it's actually hugely significant. It means that at the same time as our very own species was evolving from our ancestors with large brains, there was a smaller lineage emerging with tiny brains. This small-brained ape-human hybrid likely got its DNA from a different animal millions of years ago, and it may have lived all the way into the Stone Age. However, that last part has not been fully proven. Homo floresiensis. Homo floresiensis is beyond any shadow of a doubt the most fascinating ancient hominin. This species has been nicknamed the Hobbit, and they lived in Indonesia up until about 17,000 years ago. The first fossils were discovered in the Liangboa cave on the island of Flores back in 2003. The initial specimen was called LB1 and included a complete female skull and an almost complete skeleton, including pieces from the hands and feet, pelvis, and limbs. This is huge in the world of paleontology, when normally only a handful of teeth or a jawbone are discovered. But what was really fascinating, and what really floored researchers and took their breath away, was just how short the woman was. She died sometime around the age of 30, yet only grew to be 3.5 feet tall. And as more and more fossils were unearthed, it became obvious that Homo floresiensis was a completely separate species of hominin that were the size of hobbits. They lived at the exact same time as us, so in the grand scheme of Earth's timeline, it was basically yesterday. And yet they were smaller, more squat versions of us. And as far as anyone can tell, they only lived in Indonesia. All these years later, scientists are still struggling to figure out where Homoflorensis fits on the family tree, and how in the world such a branch of humanity existed until so recently. Scientists are also trying to figure out how they went extinct, seeing as they probably wouldn't have been under threat so secluded in the jungle. Any theories? Let me know in the comments below. The Neanderthal. The Neanderthals are a major mystery, yet are likely our closest human relative. They arrived on the scene 400,000 years ago and didn't go extinct until 40,000 years before today. They also looked a lot more like us than most of our other extinct ancestors. Whereas groups like Homo habilis were covered in fur and hair and grew to be quite tall, Neanderthals were shorter and a lot less hairy. Males on average were only 5'5", with women slightly shorter at 5'1". What really set the Neanderthal apart from all the other ancient humans was that they had gigantic brains. In fact, they had brains just as large as ours, maybe even bigger, which means they may have been smarter than us. Not only were they smarter than us, but they were a lot stronger. They were shorter, stockier, better adapted to living in brutal conditions, and still retained much of their primitive ape strength. Thanks to their big brains, the Neanderthals were able to use all kinds of sophisticated tools. They built shelters, made clothing to wear, and ate a diverse diet of plants and animals. They even sometimes made decorations and sentimental objects, showing the first real progression from animal instinct to human curiosity. And finally, there has been evidence that they marked their graves with flowers, something no other early human species has ever been caught doing. The Great Extinction and the Rise of Homo sapiens. 300,000 years ago, there were at least 9 human species wandering around the planet. Now, there is only one. We had the Denisovans and erectus in Asia and the Homo rhodesiensis in Central Africa. There were other species with small brains like the Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and even the mysterious red deer cave people in China. Considering many of these species have just been discovered in the last decade or two, there will very likely be more species found soon. But here's what's a little disturbing. By 10,000 years ago, every other species except for us was gone. Scientists say the disappearance of all the other hominins looks like a mass extinction event, but not from a catastrophe like an asteroid or a volcanic eruption. Instead, scientists believe every other human relative went extinct because of the rise of Homo sapiens about 260,000 years ago. We came up from southern Africa, spread into the north, and very likely triggered massive bloodshed and loss of life. We competed for land, and we won. Scientists don't know exactly how it all happened, but are fairly sure we had something to do with it. In fact, we are probably directly responsible for the death of the Neanderthals 40,000 years ago, the very people who may have actually been our superiors. They had been living in Europe, and when we spread out of Africa and entered Europe, it brought us into direct confrontation. Whatever happened, the Neanderthals weren't in Europe much longer, and humans spread out across the world like wildfire. Homo Longi. In Harbin City, China, back in 1933, a mysterious skull was discovered. This skull was perfectly preserved. It had square eye sockets, huge teeth, and evidence of a thick brow. The skull was way bigger than that of the Homo sapiens, and it seemed to belong to a mysterious, unknown species of human. Nobody knew what it meant, and the skull was stashed in a drawer and everyone forgot about it. Until just now. Finally, a team of Chinese and British researchers have studied the skull and identified it as a member of Homo Longi, a totally new type of hominid. Here's where things get crazy. The fossil itself is about 146,000 years old, making the Homo Longi one of the last men standing in the great race to become the dominant hominin. However, scientists are still trying to determine its relationship with other species and its place in human evolution. Surviving DNA on the skull suggests we may actually be more closely related to the Homo Longi than the Neanderthals, which would turn everything we know on its head. The Japanese ghost wolf. There is a chance that an apex predator believed to be extinct for the last century could still be alive, deep in the forested mountains of Japan. At least that's according to the eyewitnesses who believe they've seen the beast. Hiroshi Yagi is one of these witnesses. He was driving through the famous Chichibu Tamakai National Park when he saw an animal move up from a stream less than 10 feet from his car. The creature looked like the extinct Japanese wolf. Hiroshi tried to take some pictures of it, but the photos turned out too blurry to be used as any kind of solid evidence. As far as scientists are concerned, there hasn't been a wolf in Japan for at least 100 years. The last Japanese wolf died in 1905, and its pelt was sent to the Natural History Museum in London. Nobody has seen one since, and all the discoveries of bones and fur date prior to 1905. The Japanese wolves that once prowled Japan's forests are seemingly dead and gone. And yet Hiroshi and others like him have reported hearing howls in the forest late at night and seeing wolf-like creatures. There is a small possibility that a rogue pack of wolves still thrive in Japan's wild territories, though it is doubtful. Nobody's ever managed to capture a good photo of one, and no other evidence except witness testimonies exists. The woolly mammoth. It may be unnecessary to go through all the trouble of bringing the woolly mammoth back to life. Evolutionary scientists and mad geniuses are currently in a desperate bid to revive the extinct woolly mammoth, but they might not have to. According to some, the woolly mammoth is very much still alive. There are herds of them wandering the vast and largely unpopulated Siberian taiga. The Siberian tundra is a place where you can roam for hundreds of miles without ever bumping into another person. It's the frozen equivalent of the Sahara Desert in Africa. For years, locals have told tales of mammoth sightings. Some claim to have seen these woolly beasts drinking from rivers and meandering across the ice in the distance. In the 1940s, there was a rumor of military pilots who spotted a small herd of animals that looked like elephants moving in Yakutia. And in 1978, a similar herd of fuzzy elephants was supposedly witnessed in the same region on the Indigirka River. Sadly, for those who desperately want to see a woolly mammoth in the flesh, scientists say the accounts are nothing but urban legends. Nikita Zimov, a Russian ecologist at the Pleistocene Park in Yakutia, says he would gladly support a living mammoth theory. It's his ultimate dream to see mammoths walk the earth again, yet he has to admit that in all his years of reviving the natural habitat of mammoths in the subarctic steppe, he's never seen one. It's his firm belief that they went extinct for good 3,380 years ago. What do you think? Should we bring the woolly mammoth back to life? Let me know in the comments below. The Javan Tiger. No one has seen a Javanese tiger since the early 20th century. The legendary big cat was once the only subspecies of tiger living on Java Island in Indonesia. It was slightly larger than the Bali tiger and about the same size as the Sumatran tiger. This means a male weighed upwards of 300 pounds, making it a seriously formidable cat. They lived all throughout the lowland forests, but with the population boom of the 19th century, their natural habitat was destroyed. They were seen less and less, and then slowly but surely, not at all. In the 1980s, the animal was declared officially extinct. It didn't help that humans hunted them excessively during the years when their habitat was being bulldozed. In fact, one of the most brutal traditions on the island of Java was called Rampogan Makan. This was a barbaric ritual in which local tigers would be pitted against animals like buffaloes in a fighting pit, then killed by men with spears. When the zoos started to become popular in the 1930s, these tigers were hunted, captured, and shipped to zoos and circuses across the world. In the 1950s, there were only 25 left, and then they were gone. But although the Javan tiger is officially extinct, there are some conservationists who think there could still be a few left. In 2008, there were reports of people being attacked by Javanese tigers. One woman was allegedly discovered mauled to death in central Java. There were other sightings in 1999, and the most recent ones in 2017. In the Ujung Kulon National Park, somebody captured an image of what looks very much like an extinct Javan tiger wandering through the woods. The Last Great Ape. Bigfoot could be the last surviving member of an ancient species of great ape, twice the size of an average human being. Thanks to fossilized evidence, we know a beast named the Gigantopithecus roamed the thick jungles of Southeast Asia before it went extinct several 100,000 years ago. It was around for at least 2 million years, standing a whopping 10 feet tall and almost 600 pounds. Very few fossils of the hefty primate have ever been found, and consist mostly of teeth and only 4 partial jaws. Scientists still don't know where the extinct ape fits on the evolutionary tree. But let's move back to Bigfoot for a second. No other mysterious creature, aside from maybe the Loch Ness Monster, has been seen as much as Bigfoot. Throughout the forests of North America, the elusive man-ape has been seen by hikers and forestry workers for decades. There have been so many sightings of Bigfoot that experts in the field believe there is no way all the eyewitnesses could be wrong. But if there really is a big, shaggy creature alive in the forest, what is it? It's obviously not a person, and descriptions of the beast seem to point in the direction of an ape. There is a small, very remote possibility that somehow, despite all the odds, a prehistoric 10-foot-tall ape is still alive in North America right now. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I want to say a big thank you to Mike and April Torres for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. We'd love to have you! Mexican grizzly bear. In 1519, when Spanish conquistadors arrived at the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they encountered a lot of things totally foreign to them. It was a new world, like stepping foot on an alien planet. The emperor at the time, Montezuma, gave the strangers a tour of his private zoo and garden, and it was there that the Spanish beheld a great silvery bear, the likes of which they had never seen. It was an absolute beast, and the first time someone from Europe had seen a Mexican grizzly bear. The Aztecs called it piscini, and the Spanish soon saw more and more of the animals in the wild. During the Coronado expedition of 1540, the Mexican grizzly was spotted in its natural habitat. It could stand over 6 feet tall and weighed over 700 pounds. Not quite as big as the grizzlies up north, but it was still a fierce creature. As far as we know, it hasn't been around since the early 20th century. The last Mexican grizzly was killed in Baja in 1899 by American trophy hunters. And although the bears were deemed protected species, they continued being trapped and skinned up until the 1960s. That was when wildlife officials in Mexico determined the bear officially extinct. But they may have been wrong. In 1968, American biologist Carl Buckingham Coford allegedly witnessed one of the grizzly bears in the Sierra del Nido. In 1976, a rancher in Sonora supposedly shot one that came onto his property 50 miles from the border of the United States. It's unclear if somewhere in the Mexican wilderness a grizzly bear is still alive today, but it is highly likely that they survived at least until the early 1990s. The frilled shark. Off the coast of Portugal, researchers were shocked to discover a species of shark that lived 80 million years ago. It's called the frilled shark, and nobody knows how many of them are left. The IUCN Red List of threatened species has them listed as least concern, meaning they are nowhere close to becoming extinct. And yet nobody knows if there are 10 of them or 1,000 of them. The frilled shark is so rarely witnessed that it is impossible to estimate their population. Scientists only first saw one in 2004, and they have no idea how they managed to survive a mass extinction event and humanity. One look at the frilled shark and you can see just how prehistoric it is. It has much more primitive traits than other sharks, like its snake-shaped head and slender body. It doesn't have a very strong bite, it's not a great swimmer, and its teeth are backwards. Scientists call it a living fossil, and for good reason. After 80 million years, the frilled shark has developed a lot of handy traits. For example, it has the longest gestation period of any animal we know about. It takes 42 months to give birth. Then, when it does, the babies are already smart enough to fend for themselves. The night parrot. One of the greatest comeback stories of the animal kingdom involves a very small nocturnal parrot. It's called the Australian night parrot, and no one saw one for 140 years. It wasn't until naturalist John Young came across one in 2013 that the bird miraculously went from extinct to very much alive. Sean Dooley of BirdLife Australia called it the bird-watching equivalent of finding Elvis flipping burgers at an Australian roadhouse. But then things started to fall apart. The issue was that John already had a history of making doubtful and questionable claims. He allegedly discovered the extinct paradise parrot in 1980, then failed to produce evidence. And in 2006, he claimed the discovery of an entirely new species of parrot, though that was later disproved. It seemed to appear that John really did find the night parrot, but then it turned out he had faked audio recordings of it. One of his pictures even showed the night parrot nest with fake eggs inside. These days, there have been many night parrot sightings, and the population appears to be booming. But as for John Young, he faked way too much when he didn't need to, and lost the respect he could have had with his initial discovery. The quagga. The quagga is a relative of the zebra that went extinct over 100 years ago. This exotic animal had stripes, but only on the front half of its body. They were like half zebras, and once roamed South Africa in great herds. But when European settlers arrived, they hunted the bizarre zebra relatives all the way to extinction. By the 1880s, the last one was dead. But just because the quagga is extinct doesn't mean it will be gone forever. Scientists have just brought one back to life. In one of the most exciting scientific breakthroughs of this century, scientists use selective breeding to create an animal that looks almost identical to the extinct quagga. The group is called the Quagga Project, and their leader is Eric Harley. Eric says the key to recreating the lost species was hidden in its genetics. They tested preserved quagga skins to first determine that yes, the animal was a subspecies of the plain zebra. The team figured that the genes would still be present in the modern zebra and could manifest if they bred them in a very selective manner. And that was what they did, selectively breeding zebras until 5 generations later, they had a zebra with only half its stripes, just like a quagga. Living dinosaurs. There is no real way to demonstrate with 100% accuracy that every single dinosaur is extinct. After all, there is a minuscule, astronomically slim chance that somewhere, a single specimen from the age of the dinosaurs is still alive and thriving. It is extremely unlikely, but not impossible. After all, the coelacanth was believed to be extinct until 1938. Scientists believed the prehistoric fish died once and for all in the Cretaceous period, 65 million years ago. When reports of the coelacanth being discovered off the coast of Africa made their way around the world, scientists laughed. They said it was as ridiculous as finding an ankylosaurus living in a Siberian cave. And yet the coelacanth is still alive right now. So what proof is there that a dinosaur still lives among us? The answer is no proof at all. Unfortunately, just about every rumor or eyewitness sighting of a dinosaur has come up short. The closest we have to the possibility of a living dinosaur is in the Congo. For years, there have been rumors of a sauropod, a long-necked herbivorous dinosaur living in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's supposedly hiding deep in the African jungle. People have supposedly caught a glimpse of it, and real scientists have made expeditions to find it. And yet all expeditions turned up zero evidence. Sure, there could be a 20-ton dinosaur in Africa, but we still don't have any reliable proof. Tasmanian tiger. By all official accounts, the Tasmanian tiger is extinct. The predatory marsupial, which once roamed across Tasmania and Australia, also known as the thylacine, officially went extinct in 1936. Imagine everyone's surprise then when Neil Waters, the president of the Thylacine Awareness Group of Australia, showed photographs that he said proved these animals are still alive. The photos allegedly showed a family of Tasmanian tigers, although they were quickly debunked by animal specialists. Neil wasn't the only one who put forth photographic evidence of the animals still being alive. All kinds of strange footage has been revealed in recent years, with sightings increasing since the 1980s. Even though the Tasmanian tiger is scientifically extinct, people continue to see them all throughout Australia and Tasmania. Adam Pask, a thylacine specialist at the University of Melbourne, says most sightings are misidentifications. People are seeing wild dogs and mistaking them for the extinct marsupial. But not everyone is convinced. Researchers from the University of Tasmania collected over 1,200 records of sightings, with some as recently as 2019. They believe even if the Tasmanian tiger is extinct right now, it may have happened much later than believed, possibly in the early 2000s.
The Lasso Titan Atrox. 66 million years ago, there was a predator that prowled the oceans around what is today Morocco. At the end of the Cretaceous period, just before the dinosaurs went extinct, the mosasaur was one of the most frightening creatures on the planet. This particular species, called the Lasso Titan Atrox, grew to be an astounding 33 feet long. It was so big that it likely fed on other marine reptiles, including members of its own family. Its name translates to merciless sea giant. Researchers recently discovered proof of this real-world sea monster in western Morocco, not far from Casablanca. Scientists found fossilized skulls, several jaws, and a handful of other remains that they used to identify the animal. What really shocked them was that the teeth they found were almost always chipped or broken, suggesting very violent attacks on behalf of the mosasaur. It must have been biting its victims so hard that it pierced their bones and broke off shards of its teeth. Right before the asteroid hit, there was serious diversity all across the planet. Discoveries from Morocco prove that before the dinosaurs died, the Lasso Titan Atrox was everywhere. The ocean was teeming with very real monsters that most people will be glad aren't around anymore. To get a good idea of what a mosasaur looked like, picture a shark the size of a whale and mixed with a lizard and a snake. The very largest of them all was a specimen found in Russia, estimated to be 56 feet in length. Mauisaurus. One of the largest carnivorous marine reptiles that ever lived was the plesiosaur. There were a lot of different kinds, the same way there are lots of different kinds of sharks. They came into existence about 245 million years ago and thrived in the world's oceans up until 65 million years ago. When the asteroid killed the dinosaurs, it also killed many of the giant marine reptiles. The first plesiosaur skeleton was described by William Stukeley in 1719. Mary Anning then became the first person to find an almost complete plesiosaur in the 19th century in England. Since then, scientists have been very busy collecting countless plesiosaur specimens. One of the most frightening of all the plesiosaurs was the Mauisaurus. It lived between 80 and 69 million years ago and may have been the largest marine reptile in its region. It lurked along the coastlines of New Zealand at a whopping 26 feet long. The Mauisaurus also had one of the longest necks of any plesiosaur, with an astounding 68 cervical vertebrae. It was basically the Loch Ness Monster, only real, with huge flippers and a slender body to give it flexible movement. It could swim at extraordinarily high speeds, allowing it to easily hunt its favorite food, like fish and squid. Do you think the Loch Ness Monster could have been a plesiosaur? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Compsognathus. During the late Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago, there was a terrifying creature about the size of a turkey. It lived throughout Germany and France, and it only stood about 3 feet tall. Yet it was an absolute menace. It was a small bipedal dinosaur that ran around on its 2 legs and feasted on every meaty animal it could find. But how could such a short animal be so scary? Well, a single Compsognathus wouldn't be a very big deal. You could most likely fend one off with a shovel or a few well-placed kicks. But these things hunted in packs. Not small packs either, but huge gangs of starving lizards that would literally eat you alive. Packs of the Compsognathus may have been able to take on animals significantly larger, in the same way packs of wolves can take down a much bigger beast, like a buffalo. On the other hand, there's no way of knowing for sure. These small dinosaurs may have feasted primarily on bugs and little lizards. For a long time, the Compsognathus was even considered the smallest avian dinosaur that ever lived. But then, the Microraptor and the Mahakala were discovered to be even tinier. If these things were still alive today, no doubt they would be terrorizing the neighborhood. Apatosaurus. The Apatosaurus, or deceptive lizard, was positively huge. It was first identified based on an incomplete set of juvenile bones in 1877. All these years later, there are still only 2 Apatosaurus specimens. But even with only 2 specimens, we can see just how monstrous this giant dinosaur was. It lived between 155 and 150 million years ago, and was one of the largest land animals to ever walk the earth. It may have reached a shocking length of 74 feet, weighing 39 tons. This thing was so big, it could have swung its tail and knocked down an entire neighborhood. It would have squished you, your car, and your house under one of its massive feet. In today's modern world, there is not enough space for the Apatosaurus to roam free. The dinosaur, which was a type of sauropod, was so big it could have trampled a whole herd of elephants. There would be nowhere to put a herd of these long-necked dinosaurs on today's planet. And even though they were giants, it's believed they weren't necessarily aggressive or purposely destructive. It's just that they were huge, so big that they couldn't help but cause damage wherever they went. In 1997, a computer model detailed how the tail of the Apatosaurus could produce a boom like a cannon shot, like the crack of a whip that could be heard for miles around. Big shout out to Ubaldo Myers and William Davis. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family, because why not? Gastornis. The Gastornis was a flightless bird that lived about 55 million years ago during what scientists call the Paleogene period. We know of the creature's existence because fossils of it have been found in Europe, Asia, and North America. These huge flightless birds lived pretty much everywhere, but they were far more terrifying than the flightless birds we have today. Alive right now are birds like penguins, ostriches, and emus. And while emus are most certainly terrifying, they were nothing compared to the Gastornis. The Gastornis could grow 6 feet tall and weigh several hundred pounds. But what made them so scary was their heads. They had huge noggins, with even larger beaks that gave them an incredibly menacing appearance. Their beaks were almost like pointy sledgehammers, so hard they could have used them for cracking open skulls like walnuts. The closest thing you could compare a Gastornis to would be New Zealand's moa, the flightless bird that went extinct about 600 years ago. The moa could grow almost 7 feet tall and weighed upwards of 340 pounds. It's believed humans hunted them to extinction because they were so dangerous. The moa was one of the last dinosaur-like birds to exist on our planet, and they were even worse than the Gastornis. The truth is that the planet has been plagued by monstrous birds for millions of years. We are currently living in a rare time in which birds aren't actively hunting us. But even though most birds throughout history have been ruthless carnivores, scientists think the Gastornis may have been an herbivore. Instead of using its thick beak for cracking skulls, it might have used it to gather plant material and seeds. Which do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thylacosmilus. The Thylacosmilus atrox was a marsupial that lived in South America between 9 and 3 million years ago. And although it was a marsupial, it was more similar to the saber-toothed tigers of North America than any marsupials we have on Earth today. It had huge canines that continued to grow, which originally led paleontologists to think it was a saber-toothed cat. When scientists first started looking over the fossilized remains, they were shocked by its size. The Thylacosmilus was only about half as big as the Smilodon fatalis, aka the saber-toothed tiger. To compare the Thylacosmilus to something still alive, it was about the same size as a jaguar. With more research, it soon became clear the ancient marsupial was entirely unlike Ice Age cats. Professor Christine Janis from the University of Bristol says the Thylacosmilus lacked incisors, which cats use to scrape meat from bone. Its canines were also quite different from Ice Age cat canines, and were more triangular, like a claw. Scientists believe the Thylacosmilus had an extremely weak bite. Even though the marsupial was just as dangerous as a starving jaguar, it may have primarily been a scavenger. Researchers have suggested it only used its huge canines to open a carcass and then slurped out the insides with its giant tongue. They have compared its eating habits to animals like walruses and anteaters, not big cats. Coelophysis. The Coelophysis lived somewhere between 228 and 200 million years ago during the late Triassic. It was a North American dinosaur that feasted only on meat, standing almost 7 feet tall and weighing nearly nothing at 50 pounds. This dinosaur was larger than most people, yet it only weighed about as much as a medium-sized dog. It was aerodynamic, slender, and its bones were extremely light. For this reason, the Coelophysis had incredible speed. It was able to zip through prehistoric jungles as it hunted for its next meal. Just because the dinosaur was thin and gangly didn't mean it couldn't hunt. It was still a predatory dinosaur, one that most likely feasted on early relatives of mammals and anything smaller than itself. Its jaws were equipped with rows of sharp teeth for slicing and slashing. If a predator like this still existed today in the wild, it would be enough to keep most people indoors. There is no way a human being would ever be able to outrun such an agile dinosaur. Entelodont. There was once a pig that lived on the planet, but looked like it came straight from hell. The terrifying piglets were so awful that even scientists have referred to them as hell pigs. Officially, the animals are called entelodonts and were not technically pigs, but they were pig-like abominations that wandered across North America and Eurasia until 18 million years ago. Entelodonts could be found in the forests and in the plains, roaming in massive herds and most likely making such loud noises they could be heard from miles away. Entelodonts had long snouts, thin legs, and stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder. That would make the entelodont taller than most horses, yet just as ferocious as a wild boar. The species that terrorized North America is called Archaeotherium, and its main stomping ground was the great state of Texas. They moved in to dominate the region about 35 million years ago. But just what made the entelodonts so ugly? First of all, they had a lot of teeth. They didn't have flat pig teeth, but teeth more like saber-toothed cats. They also had a hump on their back, kind of like a bison, which scientists say was necessary for them to lift up their heavy heads. Researchers also believe the entelodonts could open their mouths at a 150-degree angle, just like hippos do. In all likelihood, they were extremely aggressive. And just like modern pigs, they were omnivore scavengers. They would hunt, scavenge, and do whatever they needed to get a meal. Considering how dangerous herds of wild pigs are these days, just imagine how much trouble herds of wild entelodonts could cause for modern society. What do you think is scarier, a giant bird or a wild boar? Let me know in the comments. Ginso Shark. The Ginso Shark was one of the most frightening sharks that ever swam the world's oceans. The animal's scientific name is different and harder to pronounce, but it was named Ginso after the kitchen knife for how sharp and dangerous its teeth were. The Ginso Shark had a mouthful of teeth so sharp they could slice through bone. According to National Geographic, evidence has shown that the Ginso Shark was above even the most fearsome apex predators of the prehistoric age. Prior to the extinction of the dinosaurs, the Ginso Shark hunted everything it could get its teeth on. That included massive marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, two of the most legendary sea monsters to ever exist. But no matter how fearsome of a marine predator you were, there was no standing up against the Ginso Shark. What few calcified remains scientists have found suggest the shark grew at least 24 feet long. They were surprisingly similar to the modern great white shark, but the Ginso Shark was prehistoric and brutal, with 2-inch-long teeth. The only animal we know about that preyed upon this shark was a particular type of mosasaur called Tylosaurus. The Tylosaurus was a giant mosasaur, over 50 feet long. Archaeopteryx. The Archaeopteryx was a transitional dinosaur, a blend of avian and reptilian characteristics. It was a cross between a dinosaur and a modern bird, sharing features from both kinds of animals. But for a long time, researchers only thought it was a bird. Its fossil was discovered in Germany, and German paleontologists nicknamed it Brigo, which means first bird. These days, we know exactly what kind of animal the Archaeopteryx was: a terrifying flying predator. It lived about 150 million years ago in Bavaria, at a time when Europe was an archipelago. The animal wasn't very big, only weighing about 2 pounds. It was no larger than a raven and had wings with strange rounded ends. It also had a huge tail nearly as long as its body. Based on this description, the Archaeopteryx sounds a lot like a bird. It was the same size, it had feathers and plumage, and it had aerodynamic abilities. However, nobody knows if it could physically fly. It may have been a glider, leaping between trees and using its wings to glide. The Archaeopteryx is the oldest flying member of any avian family on record, but it was also part dinosaur. It had killing claws that it could use to tear its prey apart. It also had jaws complete with sharp teeth like little knives for being an active predator. Try to imagine a bird the size of a crow, except with much larger wings, sharper claws, and teeth. It's a good thing this monstrosity isn't around today. Just imagine 30 or 40 of them loitering on the telephone lines outside your house. Dinosaur fleas. Fleas have been a nuisance for millions of years, since the days of the dinosaurs. Except back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, fleas were about 10 times bigger. Researchers have recently discovered the fossils of organisms very similar to fleas that crawled onto dinosaurs and bit them. Professor George Poiner Jr. from Oregon State University says it would have felt like a hypodermic needle going in, and it would have been extremely painful. We're lucky that our modern fleas aren't nearly as big as the ones that bothered the dinosaurs. The fossils of the newly identified species were found in Inner Mongolia. They weren't preserved as two-dimensional impressions, but fully fossilized, just like dinosaur bones. They are really well preserved and have given scientists a detailed map of the creature's body structure. They had flat, disgusting bodies just like modern bedbugs and ticks. But their claws were much longer, designed so they could crawl over the scales of dinosaurs. Modern fleas have evolved to move swiftly through fur and feathers, allowing them to feast on today's mammals and birds. But these prehistoric bugs needed claws like ice picks to pierce rough dinosaur hide and armor. The ancient fleas were roughly the size of small cockroaches. Some of them were almost an inch long, living 165 million years ago. But that's only the body. When including the antenna and mouth parts, the fleas could have been about the size of your thumb. The giant titan. A new giant dinosaur has been discovered that stood 7 stories tall. It measured in at a whopping 100 tons and was 130 feet from head to tail. This thing was absolutely humongous, weighing the same as 14 African elephants. The creature's bones were found by farmers in Argentina back in 2011. They were shocked to uncover femur bones bigger than themselves. Paleontologist Egidio Ferrulio from the Museum of Paleontology then came to analyze the fossilized remains. After many years of research, they now believe the massive bones belong to a new species of titanosaur. It was a Patagonian herbivore that lived 95 million years ago. It walked on 4 legs, had a very long neck, and its tail was longer than most slides you'll find at your nearest amusement park. But was this the biggest dinosaur that ever roamed the earth? That's the question we're desperately trying to answer. Paul Barrett from London's Natural History Museum says it's premature to make any official announcements. The issue is that the newly discovered monster has been reconstructed based only on fragmented fossils. There isn't a complete skeleton, which means everything scientists say is just an educated guess. Do you think there could have been a dinosaur bigger than this one? Let me know in the comments. And now for number 8. But first, it's shout-out time. I wanted to say a big thank you to Mark Baker and Hellkaiser12 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing dinosaur discoveries. Dino hoodlums. A shocking new study has proved duck-billed dinosaurs may have been rebellious teenagers who roamed around in gangs. They may have been the hoodlums of the prehistoric age. Paleontologists were studying a pair of North American bone beds containing the fossilized remains of hadrosaurs, a type of duck-billed dinosaur. This creature was an herbivore living in the Cretaceous period roughly 75 million years ago. The bone bed allowed researchers to determine that young individuals left the herd when they reached about 45% of their maximum size. This means they probably left when they were teens. Hadrosaurs were some of the most common dinosaurs. You might compare them to deer in our modern world. They were everywhere everywhere, and they left behind a lot of bones. So many fossils have allowed scientists to gain knowledge about their interactions with one another, and these most recent bone beds have been the icing on the cake. Scientists already knew hadrosaurs left the nest when they were young, but now we have physical proof that they lived separately with individuals of their own age. It's like a bunch of college kids going out and getting an apartment together, only these were dinosaurs. Still, it's not entirely clear what the purpose of these teenage gangs of dinosaurs was. Did it have something to do with reproductive maturity? Was there a complex social structure? Did they just hunt better together? Those are the kinds of questions that scientists are still struggling to answer. What do you think these dinosaur teenagers were doing? Let me know in the comments. The Great Veggie Ancestor. For as long as dinosaurs have been in our imaginations, scientists have believed there were two distinct types. Carnivores, like the Tyrannosaurus rex, strictly ate meat, while long-necked dinosaurs were herbivores. However, a recent study has shown that dinosaur diets may have been much more diverse than previously believed. Researchers from the University of Bristol examined skulls from several different kinds of dinosaurs using CT scans. They looked at long-necked dinosaurs in particular and created 3D models of their teeth. Teeth give the best indication of what a specific animal can eat. Teeth are the natural tools for breaking down food. Herbivores have dull teeth for breaking nuts and chewing leaves, while carnivores have sharp teeth for ripping meat. Dinosaurs had a lot of different kinds of teeth. They had teeth like blades, teeth shaped like leaves, all kinds. This proves that dinosaurs evolved to have many different feeding habits. Certain dinosaurs had certain dietary restrictions. Scientists found some of the earliest dinosaurs that were classified as carnivores had teeth very similar to monitor lizards, and early dinosaurs classified as herbivores had teeth much like iguanas. The consensus is that at the beginning of dinosaur evolution, most animals were likely omnivores. Even long-necked giants may not have been strictly vegetarians and may have started out eating insects and other animals. Meraxes gigas. Another new species of dinosaur was recently found in Argentina. It's called the Meraxes gigas, and it was very similar to the Tyrannosaurus rex, mainly because it was very big and had very small arms. It also had a gigantic head, which it needed for crunching up its victims and swallowing them into its oversized tummy. Researchers believe the huge carnivore's puny forelimbs weren't an accident of evolution, but an evolutionary advantage. Scientists just aren't sure exactly what that advantage was, though they think it had something to do with mating. The Meraxes gigas remains indicated that it was about 45 years old when it died. That's an exceptionally long life for a dinosaur. It weighed 4 tons and ruled the vast landscape of Patagonia 100 million years ago. It belonged to the Carcharodontosaurid family, meaning it was related to many of the biggest carnivores of the dinosaur age. And although its anatomy is still poorly understood, it's clear that its head was the main feature. Its tiny forelimbs didn't do much, and so all the animal's strength came from its noggin. It likely used its huge skull to bash its enemies, interact with its environment, and of course, to eat. The final fascinating feature of the Meraxes gigas is that it evolved at a time when carnivores in Argentina had reached peak diversity. This was right before they all started going extinct. Researchers found that it had evolved incredible facial ornamentation, something that may have helped it socially. Evidence points to these carnivores reaching impressive levels of social sophistication, the likes of which we can't even imagine. T-Rex baby. Paleontologists in Montana have found an exceedingly rare tyrannosaur baby fossil. It appears to be the fossilized remains of an infant Tyrannosaurus rex. Researchers from the University of Kansas excavated the adorable fossil from the Hell Creek Formation. The remains include a section of upper jaw, some rows of teeth, and fragments from the skull, hips, and backbones. This particular baby T-Rex lived 66 million years ago, shortly before the asteroid hit our planet and its species went extinct. David Burnham from the university says its teeth suggest it was likely a T-Rex, but because baby rexes are so incredibly rare, it's difficult to match it with something known. It could have been a different kind of carnivore baby. Experts aren't 100% sure, but it's still an amazing discovery. Researchers are hoping to go back out soon in the coming months to try and find more fossils. In recent years, archaeologists have been finding evidence that T-Rexes roamed in packs. If that's true, The baby Rex may have died in a sort of prehistoric nursery. This would have been a place where babies within the dinosaur community could be raised by adults while learning how to socialize with one another. If that does prove to be the case, they could find even more baby carnivores at the Hell Creek Formation during their next excavations. Do you think a baby T-Rex would be cute or terrifying? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. Kickboxing dinosaur. New research has found that there was a dinosaur that had a kung fu kick like a kangaroo. The dinosaur in question is called Pachycephalosaurus, most famous for having an extremely hard head. This bizarre dino had a dome-shaped skull that made it look as though it was wearing a helmet. Researchers have always thought that because of its robust headgear, the dinosaur must have specialized in headbutting. Just like how a bighorn sheep uses its horns, they figured it used its solid skull like a battering ram. However, new studies say it may have preferred kicking like a kangaroo instead. Scientists created a three-dimensional model of a Pachycephalosaurus skeleton and analyzed the vertebrae. They were a little surprised to find the vertebrae of the dinosaur shared a lot of similarities with the modern vertebrae of a kangaroo. It didn't have any similar bone structure to animals specializing in headbutting. It looks like the dinosaur used its tail for back support, just like modern kangaroos. Then it was able to lift itself off the ground and kick its enemies with both legs. Considering this was a hefty dinosaur, such a kick would have easily ruptured the rib cages of humans, broken bones, and of course, caused death. A very rare dinosaur egg. A remarkable discovery was recently made in China. A fossilized dinosaur egg from 70 million years ago was found with the embryonic skeleton still inside. The embryo is of an oviraptorid dinosaur, still curled up as if waiting to be born. Scientists nicknamed it Baby Yingling. Associate Professor Darla Zelenitsky from the University of Calgary called it an amazing specimen. She said that after 25 years of researching dinosaurs, she has never seen anything like it. Up until this discovery, very little was known about what happened inside a dinosaur egg before it hatched. Finding an embryonic skeleton is almost impossible, never mind one perfectly preserved. Researchers have already collected quite a bit of information from it. We can see that theropod dinosaurs like velociraptors were incredibly similar to modern birds. The position of the skeleton inside the egg, with its head on the other side of its feet and its back curled along the thick end, is extremely close to modern bird embryos. What this suggests is that late in the incubation period, oviraptorids developed bird-like postures. This is the most recent evidence showing just how similar dinosaurs were to birds and just how much avian animals have changed. But that's not the end of the discovery. The embryonic skeleton has shown that the hatching behavior of birds didn't originate with birds. It came from non-avian dinosaurs. The answer to the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg, seems to be dinosaur, the Spinosaurus of the Isle of Wight. Two new Spinosaur species have been discovered on the Isle of Wight. If you're not sure what a Spinosaurus is, let's do a quick recap. The incredibly dangerous dinosaur was a carnivorous monster that lived 129 million years ago. Some have called it the riverbank hunter, and others call it the heron from hell. The Spinosaurus hunted in watery, marshy areas and primarily feasted on whatever it could catch with its massive jaws. Scientists are still torn over whether it could swim, or if it simply hung out on the shore and hunted like a heron. Whatever the case, there appear to have been a lot of these voracious dinosaurs in the prehistoric world. Two new species on the Isle of Wight alone suggest there must have been dozens of species spread out across the world, and yet not many full skeletons have been found. It's too big, and its bones are always found fragmented. This has given paleontologists a headache trying to piece its anatomy together. Spinosaurus likely walked upright and mostly ate fish, but it also may have feasted on other predators and herbivores. It had jaws like a crocodile, making it look like a mix between a T-Rex and a mythical dragon. The armless monster. Paleontologists identified yet another new species of dinosaur in Argentina. They discovered a carnivore with arms so small it would have made the T-Rex look like Stretch Armstrong. Its arms were so small they were basically nubs. It's been named Guamesia ochoai, and it's a type of abelisaurid. That was a group of ruthless predators who lived across the whole planet and only went extinct because of the asteroid impact. The fossilized remains found are about 70 million years old. Unlike its its fierce dinosaur cousins, it had a really tiny brain. Researchers called its brain case remarkably small, the smallest ever found. The Guamesia ochoai has the embarrassing title of being the dumbest, smallest-brained dinosaur of its kind to have ever lived. It also had those tiny arms, so it must have been humiliating. Still, you would not have wanted to fight this thing. It was huge, nearly 20 feet long and weighing about a ton. Paleontologists have compared it to the more famous and even more ruthless Carnotaurus. But what's the deal with the arms? Researchers say they were so small they would have flopped like wet socks against its chest as it moved. It couldn't bend its arms, it had no claws, and it couldn't even grab something with its fingers. Even the T-Rex had more muscular arms. This dinosaur may have reached the end of an evolutionary path. Its limbs were likely vestigial, meaning left over from ancestors who had walked on 4 legs instead of 2. The Guamesia ochoai, just like other dinosaurs with tiny arms, was in the middle of evolving its arms right off its body. Why do you think this guy had such a small brain and no arms? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye!